The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio in 6 parts by Brian Gear, with music composed by Sidney Sager. The Moonstone, Part 3.
Once again, I, Gabriel Betteridge, take up my pen and resume the tale of the Moonstone, as requested by Mr. Franklin Blake. After the terrible event at the Shivering Sand, the death by her own hand of Rosanna Spearman, Sergeant Cuff, Penelope, and I returned to the house and changed our soaking clothes. It was now time for Sergeant Cuff to make his report to my lady. Mr. Franklin said he couldn't stand by and hear this man make out his case against Miss Rachel, and I understood his feeling. But my lady asked me to be present.
Sergeant Cuff, you are responsible for this appalling tragedy.
I beg your ladyship's pardon, but it was in my interest to keep the poor girl alive.
Oh, it was your merciless probing and prying that drove her to her death.
What drove Rosanna Spearman to her death was some unbearable anxiety about the Moonstone. And I think I can lay my hand on someone who can tell me whether I am right or wrong.
You mean my daughter. And you suspect her of taking her own diamond, of hiding it away from us and pretending it is stolen.
My lady, for the last 20 years I have been largely employed in cases of family scandal. It is well within my experience that young ladies occasionally have private debts which they dare not tell anyone about, not even their closest friends or relatives.
Debts? To whom?
Sometimes the milliner or the jeweller.
Oh.
Sometimes the money is wanted for purposes which I don't suspect in this case and which I won't shock you by mentioning.
Quite impossible. I am Miss Verinder's mother, and I can tell you that the sort of action you are suggesting is quite at odds with her character. She is absolutely incapable of such deception.
My lady is quite right, Sergeant. Miss Rachel may be sometimes a thought too forthright, but she's as open and honest as the day is long.
Right or wrong, my lady, I had drawn my conclusion. And the next thing was to put it to the test. I suggested examining all the wardrobes in the house. What happened? Everyone agreed to it, except Miss Verinder. That satisfied me that I was right. Now, if you still don't agree with me, you must be blind to what happened here today. In your hearing, my lady, as Miss Verinder was about to leave for her aunt's, I told her that her going would make it more difficult for me to recover her diamond. You saw yourselves, both of you, that in the face of that statement, she drove off. It all points to one thing and to one thing only, that Miss Verinder had the diamond in her possession and was trying to leave the house before I found it.
You make a strong case, Sergeant.
What I have to say next relates to Rosanna Spearman. My first thought was that Miss Verinder would take advantage of Rosanna's previous record and try to make me believe that she had stolen the diamond. But it was deeper than that. You see, Rosanna Spearman, before she appeared to have reformed, was no common thief. She was at the top of the profession. She had connections with one of the few men in London who would advance a large sum of money on such a jewel as the Moonstone without asking awkward questions. Now, that is something Miss Verinder would not have been able to do herself, to raise money on the diamond, I mean. So, Rosanna was the very person to help her out of this difficulty. As you know, the paint on Miss Verinder's door was smeared by a dress of some kind. The smear must have been done between midnight and 3 on Thursday morning. On Thursday afternoon, Rosanna Spearman shams ill and pretends to take to her room. But a tradesman reports that he saw her walking over to Frizinghall in the afternoon. She reappears at tea time, shams ill again, and returns to her room. Her door is locked, the keyhole is blocked up, and she lights a fire. The explanation is this. I went to Frizinghall and found that Rosanna was there on Thursday afternoon, and she bought the material to make a servant's nightgown. And on Thursday evening in her room, she made it, washed it, dried it, and ironed it, because it was her nightgown that made the smear.
How do you know?
Well, it is something I have not yet proved. But remembering what I've already told you, doesn't it seem probable that she visited Miss Verinder between midnight and 3 on Thursday morning and smeared the paint as she was leaving?
And what was she doing at the sand in the afternoon?
It's my belief she was trying to visit the hiding place. She could have got rid of the old nightgown by wrapping a stone in it and throwing it into the quicksand. Why she should have hidden it, indeed if she has hidden it, baffles me at present. Now, there are two courses of action open to me, my lady. One is to put a watch on Miss Verinder, on the people she sees, the rides and walks she takes, the letters she writes and receives.
And how would you do that?
With your permission, I could introduce a woman of great experience into your house as a servant, or Mrs. Ablewhite's house, if Miss Verinder remains there. The other thing would be for an officer in London to make an arrangement with that moneylender. You may depend upon it, Rosanna would have told Miss Verinder his name.
And how does all this spying and prying help us?
It means we draw a line round the Moonstone, and we draw it closer and closer until we find it in Miss Verinder's possession, supposing she now decides to keep it. And if her debts press, and she decides to sell it herself without Rosanna's help, then we have our man ready, and we meet it in London.
No. Absolutely no. I will not have my daughter spied on in this manner, as though she were a common criminal. You mentioned another way.
Yes, my lady. Not so certain as the other, but worth a try. A sudden shock, administered when she least expects it.
What sort of shock?
I'll go to her, at Frizinghall, and confront her with Rosanna's death. She may break down and confess everything.
Yes, to that I agree.
Oh, very good, my lady. The pony chaise is waiting. I'll go to Frizinghall without delay.
No.
I beg your pardon, my lady?
I shall tell my daughter of Rosanna's death. I am her mother. It is my right and my duty. Oh, you may rely on me to try the experiment as boldly as you would yourself. And I shall inform you of the result before the last train leaves for London tonight.
When I told Mr. Franklin what was happening, he immediately put off his plan to leave by the next train so that he could hear the news from Frizinghall. This decision left him with a lot of time on his hands, and nothing to talk about except Miss Rachel's treatment of him, and nobody to talk to except me.
How do you explain Rachel's conduct? You see, it's perfectly understandable if only we proceed from what we know, and not from what we imagine we know. Now, we know that the loss of the Moonstone threw her into a state of nervous excitement from which she has not yet recovered. Now, her being in a state of nervous excitement, are we to expect that Rachel should behave to us all as she would normally behave? Of course not. Rachel, properly speaking, is not Rachel, but somebody else. Do I mind being ill-treated by somebody else? Of course I don't. Do you know, Betteridge, I think I should like a glass of sherry.
Don't suppose that I was quit of Mr. Franklin as easily as that. He drifted round the house, found his way to the office, smelt my pipe, was instantly reminded that he had been simple enough to give up smoking for Miss Rachel, and burst in upon me with his cigar case.
Give me a light, Betteridge, there's a good chap. You know, I can scarcely believe that a man can have smoked as long as I have without discovering that there's a complete system for the treatment of women at the bottom of his cigar case. You choose a cigar, you try it, it disappoints you. So what do? You throw it away and try another.
No.
You choose a woman and she breaks your heart. So what do? You throw her away and try another.
I often felt inclined to try that when the late Mrs. Betteridge was alive. But the law insists that you smoke your cigar when once you've chosen it.
Oh, too true, Betteridge, too true. Change the law, I say.
Sergeant Cuff passed the time arguing roses with the gardener. The pony chaise returned a good half-hour before I expected it. My lady had decided to stay at her sister's house for the present. The groom brought 2 letters from Lady Verinder, one addressed to Mr. Franklin, the other to me. I sent for Sergeant Cuff and read mine to him, since it concerned him. I have performed the promise I made to Sergeant Cuff with this result. So far as Rosanna Spearman is concerned,
Miss Verinder declares that she has never spoken a word in private to her since she entered my service. They did not meet on the night the diamond was stolen, and no communication took place between them from the time the alarm was first raised to this present Saturday afternoon when Miss Verinder left us. This is the result of my telling my daughter suddenly and plainly that Rosanna Spearman is dead. She also assures me, and I believe her, that she owes no money, and that the diamond is not now and never has been in her possession since she put it into her cabinet on Wednesday night. When I asked her if she could explain the disappearance of the Moonstone, she maintained an obstinate silence. Read this letter to Sergeant Cuff and give him the cheque which I enclose. I am convinced of his intelligence, but I am more convinced than ever that the circumstances in this case have misled him.
This is such a generous estimate that Lady Verinder has made of the value of my time that I feel bound to make some return for it. I'll remember the amount in this cheque when the time comes.
What do you mean when the time comes?
Her ladyship has smoothed matters over very cleverly for the present, but this family scandal is of the sort that burst out again when you least expect it.
That's as good as saying that Miss Rachel has deceived my lady with a whole pack of lies. I consider your remark an insult, Sergeant Cuff, to both Miss Rachel and my lady.
You would do better to consider it as a warning to yourself. You haven't done with the Moonstone yet, you know. In fact, I can tell you 3 things that will happen in the near future. First, you will hear from the Yollans at Cobb's Hole. You will hear from the Indians again. And sooner or later, you will hear from that moneylender in London whom I have mentioned.
How can you be so sure?
Because they are inevitable consequences of what has already happened. You will hear from the Yollans when Rosanna's letter reaches them on Monday morning. You will hear from the Indians because they will not give up their pursuit of the diamond. You will hear from Mr. Septimus Luca because the diamond will cross his path sooner or later.
Septimus Luca?
The moneylender. He lives in Lambeth. Make a note of it, Mr. Betteridge, so that there shall be no mistake when it happens.
And with that, Sergeant Cuff left us, walking to the station with the gardener, the better to argue about roses. That left Mr. Franklin, who, having read my lady's letter to him, had also decided to go, perhaps abroad again.
Aunt Julia says that Rachel and I best apart for the present. Rachel still cannot forgive me for bringing in the police.
But that would only have been to help her get her diamond back. I cannot understand, Miss Rachel. Really, I can't.
Anyway, Aunt Julia intends to take Rachel to London for the best medical advice and to get her away from this place and all its memories.
You know the proverb, sir, when things are at their worst, they're sure to mend. Well, they can't be much worse than they are now.
Do you know, when I came here from London with that horrible diamond, I don't believe there was a happier household in England. Look at it now. Scattered, disunited, the very air poisoned with suspicion. The Moonstone has served Colonel Herncastle's vengeance by means he never dreamt of.
Tell me where you're going to, sir.
Going? I'm going to the devil!
God bless you, sir. Go where you may. That was a miserable weekend, I can tell you. Poor Rosanna Spearman's death hung over us like a pall. My lady and Miss Rachel were gone, so was Mr. Franklin. A message came from my lady summoning her own maid and Penelope to London, and Samuel the footman as well. And so on the Monday there were more departures. I was pottering about the grounds on the Monday morning when I got a jolt that shook me out of my lethargy. The first of Sergeant Cuff's prophecies came true.
Mr. Betteridge! Mr. Betteridge!
What? Why, Lucy Yolland. What brings you here, girl?
Where's Franklin Blake?
Mr. Franklin Blake, if you please.
Oh, murderer Franklin Blake would be a better name for him.
Just you watch your tongue, my girl. You've no right to say that.
No right, haven't I? Oh, she'd be living now if it weren't for him. Doesn't that make him a murderer?
No, it does not. Mr. Franklin is not to be blamed if a girl falls in love with him. He did nothing to encourage her, nothing whatever.
We had plans, Rosanna and me.
There, now, come on, love. Don't take on so.
We were going to London together to make our living from sewing. And then this morning comes a letter saying she's made away with herself. And it's his fault.
What do you want with Mr. Blake?
have a letter for him.
From Rosanna?
Yes.
Well, I'm afraid you can't see Mr. Blake. He went to London last night.
Is that God's truth?
Of course it is.
Then I will bid you good morning, Mr. Betteridge.
No. Wait a minute, Lucy. Don't be so impatient. If you leave the letter with me, I'll forward it on to him. I have his London address.
Rosanna said I was to give him this letter myself, from my hands into his. No other way.
Be reasonable, girl.
No, from my hands into his. If he wants the letter, he must come back here and get it. From me. Write and tell him that, Mr. Betteridge.
Tuesday's post brought me 2 letters. One from Penelope saying that my lady and Miss Rachel were safely established in London. One from Mr. Franklin saying that by the time I received it he would be bound for foreign parts, quite where not even he knew at that moment. I must confess I could not get Rosanna's letter to Mr. Blake out of my mind. Did it contain the confession he thought she was trying to make to him about the diamond, or was it merely the unhappy outpouring of her love for him? But until he returned to claim it, if he ever did, it would remain sealed and its secret as hidden as poor Rosanna's body in the quicksand. Wednesday came and brought nothing. Thursday brought a second budget of news from Penelope. Some great London doctor had been consulted about Miss Rachel and had earned a guinea by recommending that she had better be amused, so there was a whole round of gaieties in prospect. Mr. Godfrey had called, and to Penelope's great annoyance had been most graciously received. On Friday, again nothing. On Saturday, the last day of my narrative, the postman brought me a London newspaper. I opened it eagerly and found one of the police reports marked in ink. As I read it, I fancied I could hear the voice of Sergeant Cuff in my head. Lambeth. Shortly before the closing of the court, Mr. Septimus Luca, the well-known dealer in gems, etc., etc., applied to the sitting magistrate for advice. The applicant stated that he had lately been annoyed by some strolling Indians,
3 in number. After having been sent away by the police, they had returned again and again, and had attempted to enter the house on pretence of asking for charity. Mr. Luca said he had only the day before been compelled to dismiss from his service a skilled carver in ivory, a native of India, on suspicion of attempted theft. He expressed a fear that this man and the street jugglers might be acting together. The magistrate remarked that if the annoyance were repeated, Mr. Luca could summon the Indians to that court. And as to the valuables in his possession, Mr. Luca would do well to
communicate with the police and adopt such additional precautions as their experience might suggest. And so Sergeant Cuff's 3 predictions had been proved right in less than a week. If you desert me and side with the sergeant, if the only explanation you can see is that Miss Rachel and Mr. Luca must have got together and that the Moonstone must be in pledge in the moneylender's house, I'm bound to say I can't blame you. At this place, then, we part. The mystery of the Indian diamond has threaded its way to London, and to London you must go after it, leaving me at the country house. And so I, Gabriel Betteridge, bid you farewell. For the present.
My name is Drusilla Clack, Miss Drusilla Clack, and I am a niece of the late Sir John Verinder. I had been cut off from all news of my relatives by marriage for some time, for when we are poor we are not infrequently forgotten. When a letter arrived from my wealthy relation, Mr. Franklin Blake, the whim had seized him to stir up the deplorable scandal of the Moonstone, and he wanted me to help him by writing the account of what I saw while visiting at Aunt Verinder's house in London. Pecuniary remuneration was offered to me. It cost me a hard struggle before Christian humility conquered sinful pride, and I accepted Mr. Blake's cheque. My diary informs me that I was accidentally passing Aunt Verinder's house in Montague Square on Monday, the 3rd of July, 1848. Seeing signs of occupation, I felt it would be an act of polite attention to knock and make inquiries. Accordingly, I was invited to luncheon the next day at 2. In addition to Lady Julia and her daughter Rachel, Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite was present. I am an ardent worker on behalf of many good causes, including the Mother Small Clothes Conversion Society, with which Mr. Godfrey was associated, so we were already acquainted, and I had the highest opinion of him. Only a few days previously, he and another gentleman, Mr. Septimus Luca of Lambeth, had been the victims of an assault which had made them the talk of London. After luncheon, Rachel, ever, I am afraid, of a wilful and unregenerate spirit, pressed him for the full story.
My dear Rachel, the newspapers have told it far better than I could.
Nonsense. It was you to whom it all happened. Now I promise you shall have no peace until you tell me the last detail.
Rachel.
Very well, then. I returned home last Friday to find a little boy waiting in the hall for me with a letter. It was from, or seemed to be from, a lady who wanted to donate a large sum of money to the Mother's Small Clothes Conversion Society, supposing she got a satisfactory reply to certain questions she wanted to put to me.
The mother's what, Godfrey?
Allow me to enlighten you, Rachel, dear. The Mother's Small Clothes Conversion Society exists to rescue unredeemed father's trousers, if you will forgive the word, at the drawing-room table, from the pawnbroker. We then, with our needles, abridge them to suit the proportions of the innocent son of the family, to prevent their resumption by the irreclaimable parent. I trust I make myself clear?
Perfectly, Clack. It sounds quite disgusting. I wonder you aren't dead of any one of 100 dreadful diseases.
Rachel!
Please go on, Godfrey.
I went to the address. It was in the Strand, Northumberland Street, and the door was opened by a most respectable, though somewhat corpulent man who conducted me to an empty room at the back on an upper floor. There was a faint odour of musk and camphor about the place, I remember, and on the table was a beautiful Oriental manuscript. I was looking at this when I was suddenly attacked from behind, overpowered and searched.
Oh.
All my personal possessions were strewn here, there, and everywhere. Of course, I didn't know this until afterwards, because I was blindfolded and gagged almost immediately.
Was it the Indians?
Well, certainly the arm that was thrown around my neck at the very start was a bare, brown arm. Yes, they could have been Indians.
And how many of them were there?
I'm pretty sure it was 2 who attacked me, and 1 who searched my pockets. 3 all told. And it was all done in total silence. I didn't hear so much as a footstep behind my back. And then when they didn't find whatever it was that they were looking for, they spoke in some foreign tongue, and then they hauled me into a chair and bound me, hand and foot.
Oh, quite shocking. And how long were you left like that?
Oh, not very long, Aunt Julia. Only a minute or 2, I should judge. The landlord and landlady found me. They'd seen the 3 Oriental gentlemen leave, accompanied by the portly gentleman who had let me in. They remembered that a visitor had arrived, but had not left, and had thought it prudent to investigate. Lucky for me that they did.
Did they know anything of the Indians?
Nothing whatever. The portly gentleman had engaged the rooms, paid a week in advance, and had said that they were wanted for friends of his, 3 Oriental noblemen newly arrived in the country.
And then exactly the same thing happened to Mr. Septimus Luca.
Indeed. But I know only what the newspapers tell us of that. Well, it appears he received a note, just as I did, except that his pretended to be from one of his customers who wanted to make a purchase. Mr. Luca went to an address in Alfred Place, off Tottenham Court Road. Exactly the same events occurred. The empty room, the beautiful manuscript, the attack. With this one difference, that they took from him a receipt which mentioned a valuable of great price.
The Moonstone.
I should hardly think so, my dear Rachel. In any case, it would have been of no use to them, since it stated that the valuable, whatever it was, should only be given up to the owner in person. No doubt their English friend looked it over and explained this to them. They made no attempt to produce the receipt at Mr. Luca's bank.
It seems an extraordinary coincidence that both you and Mr. Luca should have been attacked by these people.
The police explained that by my having been seen speaking to Mr. Luca earlier the same day.
Oh, so Mr. Luca is known to you?
Oh, no. No, but it seems we share the same bankers in Lombard Street.
Ah.
And when Mr. Luca and I were giving our statements to the police, I recognised him. It was one of those silly little contests of politeness as we met at the door of the bank. He insisted that I precede him, and I said a few civil words. Evidently the Orientals were watching him and had assumed that I was known to him.
Have the police done anything, Godfrey?
Nothing whatever.
And I suppose it is certain that the men who attacked you were also the men who attacked Mr. Luca?
Well, it would certainly seem that they were.
And not a trace of them has been found?
Not a trace.
Do you think they were the 3 Indians who came to our house in Yorkshire?
My dear Rachel, I told you they blindfolded me before I could see a thing.
What do you know about Mr. Luca?
Nothing at all. Beyond the fact that he's a moneylender. No one knows less about Mr. Luca than I do.
Had you ever seen him before you met at the bank?
Never. Now, pray forgive me, Rachel, but I am tired of talking about
But
this.
I am not. Have you seen him since?
At the police station when we were trying to help the inquiries.
This banker's receipt you said had been taken from him. Didn't it mention what the valuable was?
I haven't seen the receipt, but according to the description I've heard of it, it didn't.
Well, what did it say?
A valuable gem belonging to Mr. Luca, deposited by Mr. Luca, sealed with Mr. Luca's seal, and only to be given up on Mr. Luca's personal application. And that is all I know about it.
Some of our private affairs have got into the newspapers.
Unfortunately.
And some people are trying to trace a connection between what happened in Yorkshire and what has happened since in London.
Unfortunately, again, that is true.
Rachel, my dear, I don't see the point of questioning poor Godfrey like this. He has been through enough, goodness knows. And the doctor said you shouldn't excite yourself on the subject.
I have
of the
nearly
moon.
finished, Mamma. Tell me plainly, Godfrey. Do people say that Mr. Luca's valuable gem is the Moonstone?
They do say it. There are people who don't hesitate to accuse Mr. Luca of telling a falsehood to serve some private interests of his own. He has over and over again solemnly declared that until these events he had never even heard of the Moonstone, and these vile people reply, without a shadow of proof to justify them, that he has his reasons for concealment. I think it's shameful. Quite shameful.
Considering that Mr. Luca is only a chance acquaintance of yours, you take up his cause rather warmly, Godfrey.
I hope, Rachel, I take up the cause of all oppressed people rather warmly.
Keep your noble sentiments for your ladies' committees, Godfrey. I am certain that the scandal that has fallen on Mr. Luca has not spared you.
My dear Rachel, you really have no right to say
I
that.
mean no harm, Mamma. I mean good. Godfrey, an unlucky accident has associated you in people's minds with Mr. Luca. You have told me what scandal says of him. What does scandal say of you, Godfrey?
Oh, no, don't ask me. It's better forgotten, Rachel. It is indeed.
I will hear it.
Oh, tell her, Godfrey, please. Whatever it is, it cannot do her as much harm as your silence is doing now.
If you will have it, Rachel. Scandal says that the Moonstone is in pledge to Mr. Luca, and that I am the man who pawned it.
Oh, no. No, this is my fault. I must put it right. I had a right to sacrifice my own reputation if I wished, but to let an innocent man be ruined because...
Rachel, calm yourself. You exaggerate. My reputation stands too high to be harmed by a thing like this. It'll be forgotten in a week.
Drusilla, quick, in my workbox, a little glass vial.
Why, whatever's the matter?
Hurry, 6 drops in water. Do not let Rachel see.
Mamma, Miss Clack, hear what I say. I know the hand that took the Moonstone. I know Godfrey Ablewhite is innocent. Take me to the magistrate, Godfrey. Take me to the magistrate and I will swear it.
Rachel, you must not appear in public in such a thing as this. Your reputation is far too pure and sacred a thing to be trifled with.
My reputation? What reputation? The best detective officer in England says that I've stolen my own diamond to pay my private debts. What reputation does that leave me with? Godfrey, I won't let you be accused and disgraced through my fault. I won't. If you won't take me before the magistrate, draw up a declaration of your innocence on paper and I will sign it.
Rachel.
Do it, I say, do it. Or I'll write to the newspapers. I'll go out and cry it in the streets.
My dear, well, very well, my dear. Where's my pocketbook?
Thank you, Drusilla. Stand between us for a minute or two. Do not let Rachel see.
My dear, you're quite blue.
The drops will put me right.
Godfrey, I'm afraid I have not done you justice. You were a better man. You were more unselfish than I believed you to be. Call on us here when you can, and I will try and repair the wrong I've done you.
Are you feeling better now, dear?
Yes, thank you, Drusilla. It was not a bad attack this time.
I will come, dearest Rachel, on condition that we don't speak of this hateful subject again.
Ah, they've come to take me to the flower show. I've not distressed you, Mamma, have I?
No, my dear. Now go with your friends and enjoy yourself.
The declaration, is it ready? I must sign it before I can go out with an easy mind.
Here you are, Rachel, and here is my pen.
Rachel, dear, such an intense emotion as you have just shown is an infallible indication of an unquiet spirit. Perhaps if instead of visiting flower shows, you would care to spend an improving hour or so with a number of tracts which I happen to have with me.
Save that for those with simpler minds than mine, Miss Clack.
Rachel, my dear, I pity you.
What do you mean by pitying me? Don't you see how happy I am? I'm going to the flower show, Clack, and I've got the prettiest bonnet in London. Goodbye.
Dear Aunt, a little conspiracy. Dear Miss Clack, a pious fraud which even your high moral rectitude will excuse.
Why, Mr. Godfrey, whatever do you mean?
Will you leave Rachel to suppose that I accept the generous self-sacrifice which has signed this paper? And will you kindly bear witness that I destroy it in your presence before I leave the house? Any trifling inconvenience that I may suffer is as nothing compared with preserving that pure name from the whiff of scandal. There, a harmless heap of ashes. And Rachel will never know what we have done, will she? And now, dear ladies, I must take my leave of you. Another committee, you know.
Dear Godfrey, thank you for your kindness and understanding. And do call again, won't you?
Of course, Aunt Julia. Miss Clack, goodbye.
Goodbye, Mr. Godfrey. Dear Lady Verinder, are you quite recovered now? Should I take my leave of you to let you rest?
No, Drusilla, please sit down. Have you any pressing engagements, or is your time your own this afternoon?
Oh, no, I'm entirely free, if I can be of service to you.
You can. You can be one of the witnesses when I sign my will. Mr. Bruff is bringing it at 5.
You will? Dear me, surely it's not as bad as that.
I'm afraid it is, Drusilla. I have been seriously ill for some time past, and strange to say, without knowing it myself.
Oh, dear.
I brought Rachel to London for medical advice, and I thought it right to consult 2 doctors.
Yes, dear, yes.
One of them had been an old friend of Sir John's, and had always taken a sincere interest in me for his sake. After prescribing for Rachel, he said he wished to speak to me privately in another room. I expected, of course, that he wanted to give me some special directions about Rachel. But no, he said he had been looking at me, and he thought I was far more in need of medical advice than Rachel.
Oh, dear.
Well, the next day I was seen by both doctors, who agreed that precious time had been lost, and my case was now beyond their art.
Oh, my dear.
For more than 2 years I have been suffering under an insidious form of heart disease. There have been no symptoms to warn me, but little by little it has broken down my health. I may live for some months, or I may die before another day has passed over my head.
Oh, what terrible news, my dear. Permit me to offer what little comfort I can. I have in my possession...
Thank you, my dear. I won't conceal that I've had some miserable moments since I learnt the truth, but I am more resigned than I was. My one great anxiety is that Rachel should not know. She will be bound to think it was due to anxiety about the diamond and reproach herself bitterly.
Oh, my dear aunt, you inspire me with such interest. I shall do you such good before we part.
Good, Drusilla. What do you mean?
Now, I have any number of clerical friends who would be only too happy to see you and prepare you. It would be such a pleasure to me to...
My dear, I really don't think I could face strangers. Not under the circumstances.
Of course not. But perhaps books. I have a little library of enlightening and fortifying works. Perhaps I may bring you a few. Turned down at all the right places and marked in pencil?
Well, if you really think so, then I will do what I can to please you.
The clock on the mantelpiece informed me that I had just time to hurry home to provide myself with a first series of selected readings, say a dozen only, and to be back in time to meet the lawyer and witness Lady Verinder's will. The servant who answered the door upon my return informed me that the doctor had called and was still with my aunt. I was shown into the library and found Mr. Bruff, the lawyer, who had arrived a minute before.
Miss Clack, how do you do? You'll find Lady Verinder somewhat occupied with business this afternoon.
I'm well aware of that, Mr. Bruff. She has been so good as to ask me to be one of the witnesses to her will.
Oh. Well, you'll do. You're over 21, and you have no pecuniary interest in it whatever.
I'm relieved to hear it, Mr. Bruff. Doubtless there are those who would misconstrue my motives were it otherwise.
Oh. And what's the latest news in the charitable circles? How's your friend, Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite, after the mauling he got from the rogues in Northumberland Street? Egad, they're telling a pretty story about him at my club.
A vile falsehood, sir.
Oh, yes, you believe in your friend, Miss Clack. But the world in general is not so easy to convince as a committee of charitable ladies. He was in the house where the diamond was lost, and he was the first to leave it afterwards. Ugly circumstances, ma'am, viewed by the light of later events.
Later events? Oh, and what later events do you mean, Mr.
I
Bruff?
mean those in which the Indians are concerned. What do they do the moment they are let out of prison at Frising Hall? They go straight to London and fix on Mr. Luca, who consequently feels alarmed for the safety of a valuable of great price. He lodges it under a general description in his banker's strong room. Now, whom do the Indians seize and search? Not Mr. Luca only, but Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite as well.
I understand from Mr. Ablewhite that he had been seen speaking to Mr. Luca earlier that same day.
That won't do, Miss Clack, that won't do. Half a dozen other people spoke to Mr. Luca that morning. Why were they not followed home and decoyed into the trap? No, the plain inference is that Mr. Ablewhite had his interest in the valuable as well as Mr. Luca. The Indians were so uncertain as to which of the two had the disposal of it, they had no alternative but to search them both. Public opinion says that, Miss Clack. And public opinion on this occasion is not easily refuted.
I don't presume to argue with a clever lawyer like you, Mr. Bruff, but is it quite fair to Mr. Ablewhite to pass over the opinion of the famous London police officer who investigated the case? Which was that not a shadow of suspicion rested upon anybody but Miss Verinder herself.
Do you mean to tell me, Miss Clack, that you agree with Sergeant Cuff?
I judge nobody, sir, and I offer no opinion.
Well, I do. I judge Sergeant Cuff to have been utterly wrong, and I offer the opinion that if he had known Rachel's character as I know it, then he would have suspected everybody in the house but her. Oh, yes, I admit she's self-willed, and unlike other girls of her age, but true as steel, and high-minded and generous to a fault. If the plainest evidence in the world pointed one way, and nothing but Rachel's word of honour pointed the other, then I would take her word before I took the evidence, lawyer as I am.
Suppose you found Miss Verinder extraordinarily interested in what has happened to Mr. Ablewhite and Mr. Luca. Suppose she asked the strangest questions and showed the strongest agitation when she found out the turn this scandal was taking.
Suppose anything you please, Miss Clack. It wouldn't shake my belief in Rachel Verinder, not by so much as a hair's breadth.
Then permit me to inform you that Mr. Ablewhite was in this house not 2 hours since, and that Miss Verinder herself denied he had any connection with the disappearance of the Moonstone. Denied it, Mr. Bruff, in the strongest language I have ever heard used by a young lady in my life.
Eh? What's that you say, Miss Clack?
And what do you say about Mr. Ablewhite now?
I say this. If Rachel has testified to his innocence, then I don't scruple to say that I believe in it as firmly as you do. I've been misled by appearances, like the rest of the world.
But there is surely another conjecture to be made.
Maybe, but I must own I don't know what it is.
You said that one of your reasons for suspecting Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite was that he was in the house at the time of the diamond's disappearance. But so was Mr. Franklin Blake.
Ah, it won't do, Miss Clack. It really won't do a second time. I own that Franklin Blake is a prime favourite of mine, but that doesn't matter. You see, Franklin Blake had no possible cause to steal the Moonstone.
His debts are notorious in the family.
And Mr. Ablewhite's debts have not yet reached that stage, quite true. But there are 2 objections in the way of your theory.
Really? And what are they?
First, I manage Mr. Blake's affairs, and I can tell you that the vast majority of his creditors, knowing his father to be a rich man, are quite content to charge interest and to wait for their money. There's your first difficulty. The second is tougher still. Lady Verinder has told me that Rachel was ready to marry Franklin.
To marry him?
Aye, to marry him. Oh, yes, she'd drawn him on and put him off again, but that's the way of young girls. But she told her mother that she loved Franklin, and what's more, her mother had told Franklin. So there you are. With his creditors content to wait, and with a certain prospect of marrying an heiress, will you tell me why Franklin Blake should steal the Moonstone?
The human heart is unsearchable. Who is to fathom it?
In other words, he might have taken the diamond through natural depravity. Well, suppose he did, then why the devil did he...
I beg your pardon, Mr. Bruff. If I hear the devil referred to in that manner, I must leave the room.
I beg your pardon, Miss Clack. I'll be more careful of my language. Why, supposing he did steal the diamond, should Franklin Blake take the lead in trying to recover it?
Did I divert suspicion from himself, perhaps?
But nobody suspected him. No, it's impossible. First he steals something he had no reason to steal, and which belongs to the young lady he loves. Then he tries to help recover the jewel, and thereby provokes her implacable hostility. Oh, no.
You are very convincing, Mr. Bruff, and of course you have much experience in these matters. But who did steal the Moonstone?
Now, that I cannot tell you. In fact, I confess I find the whole case utterly baffling. The only certainty seems to be that someone has brought the Moonstone to London, and that Mr. Septimus Luca, or his banker, is in possession of it at this moment.
At this point, the servant came in to say that the doctor had gone, and Lady Verinder was waiting to receive us. The signing of the will was hurried over, to my thinking, in indecent haste. Samuel, the footman, acted as second witness. Mr. Bruff left immediately the signing was completed, so that I was alone with my aunt, who reclined among the cushions on her sofa.
I hope you won't think yourself neglected, Drusilla. I mean to give you your little legacy, my dear, with my own hand.
Give me your attention, dear aunt, to this precious book, and you will give me all I ask. Here it is. Satan among the sofa cushions.
I am afraid, Drusilla, I must wait until I am a little better before I can read that. The doctor tells me I am not so well today. He orders me, if I read at all, to read only the lightest and most amusing books. And Satan among the sofa cushions hardly promises to be light or amusing.
But you might feel stronger, dear, tomorrow. You will let me leave the book. The doctor can hardly object to that.
Very well, Drusilla, if you feel you really must.
Before I withdrew, I slipped it under her sofa cushions, close by her handkerchief and her smelling bottle. And before I left the house, finding it quiet, I was able to slip round and deposit all my other treasures in any room my aunt was likely to visit. The next day, towards lunchtime, the young footman Samuel called at my humble lodgings with a parcel in his arms.
My lady's love, and I'm to say that you will find a letter inside.
Oh, thank you, Samuel. Just one moment before you go. Could I see Lady Verinder if I called? I was thinking of passing by.
I'm afraid she's gone out driving, miss, with Miss Rachel and Mr. Godfrey.
Oh, indeed.
I must hurry, miss. I'm to get some tickets for the morning concert tomorrow, and I'm afraid all the places may be taken if I don't go now.
And who, pray, is going to a morning concert? Surely not Lady Verinder in her present state of health.
Oh, no, miss. Miss Rachel and Mr. Godfrey, miss. Now, excuse me, but I really must go, miss.
We had a special meeting of the Mother Small Clothes Conversion Society the next morning, summoned expressly with a view to obtaining Mr. Godfrey's advice. Instead of sustaining our sisterhood under an overwhelming flow of trousers, he had arranged to go to a morning concert. Well, on finding myself alone in my room, I naturally turned my attention to the parcel. Had my aunt sent me my promised legacy? Had it taken the form of worn-out silver spoons or unfashionable jewellery? I opened it, and what met my view? The 12 precious publications I had scattered through the house the previous day, all returned to me by the doctor's orders. Preparation by clerical friends had failed. Preparation by books had failed. The next thing to try was preparation by little notes, selected extracts from the books, copied by different hands and addressed personally to Lady Verinder. Some I wrote myself, some were written by my fellow workers at the Mother Small Clothes. 6 were sent through the post, 6 I kept myself for personal distribution. Soon after 2 o'clock the following day, I was again on the field of pious conflict. Samuel told me my aunt had had a bad night and was resting. I said I would wait in the library on the chance of seeing her. The house was quiet. Rachel and Mr. Godfrey were not yet back from the concert. The 6 letters I had posted the previous night were lying unopened on the library table. I ran lightly upstairs to scatter the other 6 throughout the house. Just as I entered the front room, I heard a knock at the street door, answered immediately by Samuel. The next moment, a man's footsteps coming up the stairs. Supposing it to be the doctor, and not wishing to be surprised by this incorrigible materialist, I slipped into the little room which communicated with the back drawing-room, and dropped the curtains which closed the open doorway. The visitor was shown in. In a minute or 2 he would be taken to see my aunt. I heard him pacing to and fro and muttering to himself. Did I recognise the voice? I couldn't be sure. And then I heard another voice. A voice I did recognise.
Why have you come up here, Godfrey? Why didn't you go into the library?
Samuel tells me that Miss Clack is in the library.
Oh, you were quite right, Godfrey. We had much better stop here.
Godfrey Ablewhite. Imagine my feelings. What to do? To show myself after what I had just heard was out of the question. To retreat was impossible. No choice but to stay in here.
I told them that you didn't like to leave your mother in her present condition, and they quite understood.
You don't think it's serious, do you, Godfrey?
Oh, no. In a few days, I'm quite sure she'll be well again.
It seems very hard that you should miss the concert. Mendelssohn's your favourite.
But I'm so much happier here with you.
Do try not to pay me compliments, Godfrey.
I never paid you a compliment in my life. Hopeless love always speaks the truth.
Have you forgotten what we agreed on when you spoke to me in the country?
I break the agreement every time I see you.
Then don't see me.
Oh, but I break it even when I think of you. Rachel, you told me the other day that I was higher in your estimation than before. Am I mad to build the hopes I do on those dear words? To dream of some future day when your heart may soften towards me?
His voice trembled. He put his handkerchief to his eyes. Even her obdurate nature was touched.
Are you so fond of me as that? Really?
Oh, Rachel, I've lost every interest in life except you. Would you believe it? My charitable business is an unendurable nuisance to me. When I see a ladies' committee, I wish myself at the ends of the earth.
Was there anything in the annals of apostasy to compare with it? What a backsliding I was witness to. Shocked though I was, I did not lose a syllable of the conversation.
I wonder if it would cure you if I made my confession. Would you think to look at me that I am the wretchedest girl living? It's true, Godfrey. What greater wretchedness can there be than to live degraded in your own estimation? That is my life now.
My dear Rachel, you can have no possible reason to speak of yourself like that.
How do you know I have no reason?
Because I know you. Besides, your silence has never lowered you in the opinion of your real friends. Of course, the disappearance of the diamond seems very strange. Your connection with the disappearance may seem stranger still, but to your true friends...
Are you speaking of the Moonstone, Godfrey?
I certainly thought that you referred to the Moonstone.
I referred to nothing of the sort. If that story ever comes to light, people will see I had to keep a miserable secret. Yes, but not that I did anything to be ashamed of. No, you misunderstood me, and it's my fault for not speaking more plainly. I will be plainer now. Suppose you were in love with some other woman, and suppose you knew it was a shocking disgrace to waste another thought on her, and suppose, in spite of all that, you couldn't forget her.
And this is what you're trying to tell me is the case with you? That there is a man who...
Oh, he doesn't know. Of course he doesn't know. But try as I may, and I have tried, God knows, I can't forget him. I can't tear him out of my heart. Oh, Godfrey, I'm so unhappy.
Will it be credited that at this point Mr. Godfrey fell on his knees before her? Not just one knee, mind you, but 2. I was indescribably shocked.
Noble creature. Yes, you are a noble creature. A woman who can speak the truth for the truth's own sake, a woman who will sacrifice her pride rather than sacrifice an honest man who loves her, is the most priceless of all treasures. Oh, Rachel, let me cure your poor wounded heart. Will you honour me? Will you bless me by being my wife?
At this point, Rachel Verinder uttered the first sensible words I had ever heard fall from her lips.
Godfrey, you must be mad.
Oh, no, I never spoke more sensibly in my life, believe me. Think of the future. Are you going to sacrifice your whole happiness on this man who doesn't even know how you feel towards him? In justice to yourself, you must not. Think of the consolations of a home, motherhood, peaceful claims and happy duties.
But then she began to weaken. Oh, how differently I should have acted in her place.
It would be useless, Godfrey. I don't love you.
I don't ask for your love. You say I have your esteem and respect. I am content with that.
Oh, don't tempt me. I am wretched and reckless enough as it is.
Hundreds, no, thousands of women marry only for esteem and respect, yet they and their husbands get on very well. A girl with your attractions cannot possibly sentence herself to a single life. You may marry some other man, some years from now, or you may marry me, and know that I prize your respect far more than the love of any other woman on earth.
Godfrey, I am miserable enough and desperate enough to give in if you keep on like this. Take the warning and go.
I won't even rise from my knees until you have said yes.
If I do, we shall both be sorry when it is too late.
No, we shan't. We shall bless the day.
Godfrey, you won't ask me for more than I can give.
I ask you only to give me yourself.
Very well.
Then you accept. You will marry me.
Yes, Godfrey. I will marry you.
He drew her nearer and nearer to him until her face touched his, and then... No, I really cannot carry this shocking disclosure any farther. Let me only say that I tried to close my eyes before it happened, and that I was just one moment too late. I had calculated, you see, on her resisting.
Shall I speak to your dear mother, or will you?
No, I don't want her to hear about this until she is better. Let us keep it a secret for the present. Now, you had better go and come back this evening. We have been here alone together quite long enough. Who has drawn those curtains? The room is close enough as it is.
Miss Rachel! Miss Rachel!
Yes, Samuel, what is it? What's the matter?
Where are you, miss?
In the back drawing room.
Oh, please come downstairs, miss. My lady has fainted, and we can't bring her to again.
That was part 3 of The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio by Brian Gear. The cast: Sergeant Cuff, John Franklin Robbins, Gabriel Betteridge, John Sharp, Franklin Blake, John Telfer, Rachel Verinder, Sally Baxter, Godfrey Ablewhite, Geoffrey Beavers, Mr. Bruff, Nat Brenner, Miss Clack, June Barry, Lucy Yolland, Liza Flanagan, and Samuel Matthew Adams. The music was composed and conducted by Sidney Sager, and the programme, which came from Bristol, was directed by Brian Miller.